with you today. I say we because, as always, Levi is with us in spirit because we are on the cusp of a very interesting college football season and another NFL season. So this college football season is going to be huge for two reasons. Number one, they're expanding the college football playoffs to 12 teams. Number two, Texas and Oklahoma have now joined the SEC. So who knows what that will do to the balance of power in the most dominant conference in college football. To get started with, we're going to go through the AP poll because that has been released as of last week. And given how it will be a 12-team playoff now, I'll go through the top 12 teams. Without further ado, UGA tops off the poll at number 1. Ohio State comes in at second. Then we've got Oregon, Texas, Alabama, Ole Miss, Notre Dame, Penn State, Michigan, FSU, Missouri, and Utah. So, outside of Missouri and Utah, no disrespect to those two programs, it's very easy to see why the NCAA wanted to move the college football playoff to 12 teams because those are essentially the 10 of the biggest programs in college football. I'm sure the NCAA is really hoping that Utah and Missouri fall out of the bottom two because right behind them is LSU and Clemson and Tennessee and Oklahoma. So if any of those four teams could overtake Missouri and Utah, then it would be 12 of the best college football programs historically, popularity-wise, in the country, all in the playoffs, vying for a spot in the national championship. So that makes the interest level through the roof. I've said it before. I'll reiterate it one last time. I do think 12 teams is a little much. I would have preferred to see an 18 playoff. But we got 12. It makes it a lot lower stakes for a regular season loss, which is always something that I thought was entertaining about college football. The fact that if you lose one game, potentially you're out of the playoffs. Now, one loss won't really set you back that much. It'll be the second loss, I would imagine, that ends up being the one to kill your playoff hopes. So, given it is a 12-team playoff, we could very well see 3 and maybe one day a 4-loss team make the college football playoffs. 4-loss might be a stretch, but there could be a 3-loss team in there somewhere. But I think they absolutely made the right choice putting Georgia number 1. Georgia, if they don't win the national championship this year, it will be a huge failure on the part of their program. They are far and away the most dominant team in college football. The only team that's beat them in the last 3 seasons is Alabama, and Alabama lost Nick Saban. Now, I think Kalen DeBoer will be a good coach, but I also think it'll take him a season or two to truly get his footing in as the head coach of Alabama. So I expect Alabama to be a playoff team this year and next year, but I don't expect them to make any sort of deep playoff run. The AP poll has Alabama coming in at 5th. I think we'll end up more in the 6 to 8 range, but who knows how it could happen. I mean, DeBoer got Washington to the national championship last year, and he has a lot better tools in his arsenal this season. So there's a chance Alabama can do some damage. Definitely don't sleep on them, but I think Georgia, it's their national championship to lose. As far as the rest of the rankings, Georgia plays Texas pretty early on in the season, too. So Texas has a shot of falling down the rankings a good deal if they lose to Georgia. And if Texas beats Georgia, then chaos will break loose on the AP poll very early on into the season. Georgia and Alabama also play each other in September. So there could be some big shakeups very quickly into this season if Alabama somehow beats Georgia. The game is in Bryant-Denny Stadium in Tuscaloosa. So They got the home field advantage. You can never count out Alabama, but Georgia plays Alabama first. Then they play Texas October 19th. So those, I think, are the biggest games on UGA's schedule where there could be a potential upset. But if they can survive that, then I am confident that they will win the national championship. As for Ohio State, Michigan just lost Jim Harbaugh to the NFL. He's now the Chargers head coach. So similar to Nick Saban leaving Alabama, I think Michigan will probably have an adjustment period post Harbaugh. But I think Ohio State and UGA, that there's a strong, strong chance that's your national championship unless somehow Penn State can pull one over on Ohio State. Oregon being number 3, I think that's very generous. Personally, I would have put Texas in that spot, but I mean, I can see it. I guess I just don't have a lot of credence or respect for that conference. I don't know, Pac-12, it's all right. I mean, Washington made a national championship, so you can't sneeze at it too hard. But the third best football team in the country, that's too much in my book. FSU is probably very happy they don't have to deal with any missing the playoffs by a hair shenanigans this go around. Number 10 spot, if they play up to par as they did last season, they should make the playoffs pretty handily. Even if they don't, they can still slide in there like they're slotted in right now at the 10th spot. I don't know. I think the biggest problem with this 12-team playoff, and I'm sure it will happen at some point, hopefully not this season, hopefully it never happens, but it's football, it's the way of the game. You're going to have some top player on a top-seeded team get injured in a first-round playoff matchup against a 12 seed. And it's going to be a meaningless game because I'm sure the 1 seed will 9 times out of 10 wipe the floor with the 12 seed just about every year. And it's going to have people saying, like, why are the top players playing in these meaningless first-round matchups? Like, this isn't basketball, it's football where injuries happen all the time. Even basketball, you have a Derrick Rose situation. I would hate to see that happen. And I'm sure with the 12-team playoff, it will at some point. It can happen in any playoff game, but the more you expand out the playoffs to include teams that don't really have a shot at winning a national championship, the more injuries that do occur in the playoffs take an air of avoidability or meaninglessness. But we'll have to wait and see how that happens. I would love it if one day a 12 seed did manage to win a national championship. That would be insane. But if you think about it, you'd only have to – I haven't drawn out a bracket in my head. You only have to win 3 or 4 games. So it is very doable. It's not like basketball or baseball where you have to win 4 games out of a 7-game series. All it takes is nose to the grindstone, win 3 or 4 games, and you're in there. So it can happen, but it's not like we see that happen too often in the NFL. Like, I can't remember the last time a team made the Super Bowl and won it, and I was just completely floored. Like some Cinderella run. Usually you can pretty much guess who's going to come home with whatever championship and whatever sports league that you're rooting for. But maybe given this college, you could have the opportunity for a well-oiled, gritty 12 seed to pull off an upset. Now, in the world of the NFL, not a whole lot of news right now. I mean, it's the preseason. Unlike college football, there's no super famous poll that you can go in and look through to get some content out of. It's pretty much the only preseason story going around. I guess there's 2. Is the Falcons and Michael Penix Jr. Their strategy for him hasn't made a whole lot of sense. And by strategy, I mean he's been sitting out for most of the preseason. So the reason that doesn't make sense is because a lot of times you use the preseason to give your rookie quarterback some reps. And because Michael Penix Jr. is going to be playing behind Kirk Cousins, logic would indicate he's not going to play any this season. unless Kirk Cousins gets injured, which hopefully that doesn't happen. But because he won't play much in the regular season, preseason would be the best logical time for him to get some experience snapping the football, throwing some passes in an NFL environment that isn't practice. But the coach of Falcons, Raheem Morris, came out and said that he doesn't want Michael Penix playing in the preseason because he doesn't want to risk injuries to him, because he doesn't want him playing behind a rookie offensive line. Now, I think that's dumb for two reasons. First off, the fact that he's not going to be your starting quarterback. So, I mean, anybody can get injured in football on any given day. So, since you don't anticipate him playing in the season, an injury to Michael Penix really has a lot lower stakes. Obviously, you don't want anybody to get injured ever, but he needs to get that experience at an NFL level of fielding some snaps, throwing some passes. And I think it could help him, the fact that he'd be playing behind a pretty poor offensive line, because that would give him experience in cutting through defenses, trying to throw under pressure, things like that. I think there are valuable lessons that could be gained from putting him in the preseason. But obviously, at the end of the day, it's the coach's call, and that's what the decision he made. And the Falcons have lost both preseason games. Obviously, it's a preseason. It doesn't matter, but not the ideal start to get people hyped up for Falcons football. Now, the other big preseason news is Aaron Rodgers hasn't played in preseason, and he has a new book out about him. Sort of similar to the It's Better to Be Feared book that came out about Brady and Belichick a couple of years ago. This one is called Out of the Darkness, and it's a biography of Aaron Rodgers, and it calls him the NFL's most polarizing player. Which, I mean, I guess, just because the NFL really doesn't have that many polarizing players. Usually every sports league has that one guy that's always causing a ruckus. You know, in the MLB, it was A-Rod for the longest time. You loved him or you hated him. In the NBA, it was Dennis Rodman. Then it was Kobe. And I guess it's now Aaron Rodgers for the NFL now that Tom Brady's retired. Some people would argue it's like the Chiefs as a franchise because success breeds hatred, and a lot of people hate the Chiefs for some reason. But yeah, I guess you could crown Aaron Rodgers as the most controversial just because he's the one that makes his opinions known on a variety of subjects, whether people care to hear him or not. So I haven't read the book. It sounds pretty interesting. It goes into a lot of personal stuff from what I've heard about his relationship with his family, which is not very good, and also just what makes him tick as a football player. So if any of you are readers listening to this podcast, go check it out. It might be good. Might be interesting to see in light of this season where pretty much this could be, I wouldn't say make or break because it makes it sound like he'll be nothing if he doesn't do good this season. But as far as, obviously he's had a Hall of Fame career, but the trajectory of the rest of his career could very well be decided by the season. If he comes back and that Achilles tear has him looking like a shell of himself, we could see the end of Aaron Rodgers in the next couple of years. If he comes back and he's doing great and is 75%, maybe even 80% of his former self, then it could be heralded as one of the greatest comebacks in NFL history. From just a purely individual standpoint, an Achilles tear, that's a tough injury to have in any sport. So, this season, it'll be interesting to watch the Jets purely to see how Aaron Rodgers looks and does. I don't expect them to be a playoff caliber team. If they do slide in there, certainly not a Super Bowl contender. So, you can't, if you're watching the Jets, it's purely for Aaron Rodgers. They have a lot of talent around him, but he's just a big question mark right now. And what he looks like, will be a big indicator of, obviously, how far the Jets can make it this go around. I don't expect him to come back and be 80% of himself. If he's like 70%, I think that's really good. I'm sort of like Klay Thompson. Obviously, different sports, comparing apples to oranges, but Klay Thompson's a very good NBA player compared to the rest of the NBA. But compared to Klay Thompson in 2018, he's not that good. Like I don't say he's washed, but he's a shell of his former self, and that's unfortunate. Injuries happen; it's a part of the game, like I was just saying. But I hope Aaron Rodgers does come back and somehow prove people wrong and have a great season. He's one of the all-time greats, and I would just love to see him make a deep playoff run. I want to see him have great throwing shootouts between the Lamar Jacksons and Patrick Mahomeses of the world in the playoffs. He's had some playoff games against Brady, and he had one against Josh Allen, I think, at one point. But other than that, he hasn't really had those like legendary postseason battles with top-tier quarterbacks. And I would just really enjoy seeing that, especially given that Brady and Ben Roethlisberger and those types are gone now. He's sort of the last of the old guard going up against the next generation, or current generation, I guess they are now, of the Mahomeses and Jacksonses of the world. So here's to hoping Aaron Rodgers has a good season. Speaking of the top quarterbacks, Tom Brady and Peyton Manning were both on the Stephen A. Smith show, ranking their top quarterbacks. Tom Brady, I guess according to him, there were only 4 quarterbacks worth ranking. Stephen A. asked him for a top 5. He gave 4. His top 4 were Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and Joe Burrow. Peyton Manning, he gave 5. His were Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, Lamar Jackson, and Josh Allen. I mean, I think they definitely have the right names on there. You can fuss all day about who should be 2, who should be 3. I tend to agree with Tom Brady's list more than Peyton Manning's. And the biggest difference is who rank. Like Peyton Manning has Joe Burrow second, whereas Brady has him 4th. So is Joe Burrow better than Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson? I think he has the potential to be. I think he has the intangibles of somebody who just has that X factor, that clutch factor that can get you through the playoffs, that certainly Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson have not indicated that they have in the playoffs. And he's made a Super Bowl, which is something neither one of those two can say. But from a pure just talent standpoint, I don't think he's up there yet. I think if he had a really good – like if he has one more deep playoff run, maybe 2, then I could put him second. But until he has a longer period of time where he's displayed the ability to play quarterback at a top caliber level, then I think 4 is a good spot. And Brady putting Josh Allen over Lamar Jackson, to me, just shows it's like picking ice cream. It's like, what flavor do you like? I mean, Josh Allen over Lamar Jackson, if you are a big fan of throwing the football, then, yeah, that makes sense. If you're a big fan of just quarterback, his job is to be essentially the point guard and make the ball move down the field no matter how it gets down there, then, yeah, you like Lamar Jackson better. So, personally, I like Josh Allen. I like a quarterback that throws. Not that Lamar Jackson doesn't, but I like a more traditional offensive skill set quarterback. I think that's something Josh Allen has an advantage on over Lamar Jackson. But I'm not going to gripe with anybody that puts Lamar Jackson second. The only gripe I would have would be if anybody put somebody other than Patrick Mahomes at number 1. Patrick Mahomes is far and away the best quarterback in the league. No questions asked. End of story. And I really, unless he gets injured, which I hope doesn't happen, I don't see that changing for the next 5 years at least. So here's the Chiefs. I don't expect them to three-peat because three-peating is insanely hard. I don't think a single NFL team has ever done it. I don't expect the Chiefs to do it this year. I mean, they were not on track to be a Super Bowl team for most of last season. They put it together towards the end. I don't expect them to do that this year. I think they're probably beat up. They're tired. This will probably be a take a knee kind of season for the Chiefs. Not that I think they won't try and go and do the best they can to repeat, but I don't have it in the cards. It's a little too early for me to put out who I think the Super Bowl favorites will be. I'd like to at least watch 2 seasons or 2 weeks before I throw out predictions on that, but it'll be interesting to say the least. One last story I want to get into just to highlight something that always bugs me. Anybody that's listened to this podcast for a long time knows that I'm partial to the old heads, and it didn't sit well with me when Anthony Edwards this week was talking about players from the past and talking about how they had no skills. I think it's just disrespectful. First off, to say that players like Michael Ray Richardson, Alex English, Fat Lever, Bill Laimbeer, people like that were unskilled, it's just disrespectful. And it shows that you might be great at playing basketball, but you lack an understanding of the history of the game. Obviously, like whenever somebody says players in the past were unskilled, everybody gets up in arms and throws out the Michael Jordans and the Magic Johnsons and the Larry Birds and the Isaiah Thomases of the world. And whenever I hear a player say that, I don't look at it as them taking a shot at Michael Jordan, saying he's not skilled, or Magic or Bird or whoever, Isaiah. I look at it more as a swipe against the people going up against them more than anything. It's a way to undercut the greats of those past generations by saying who did they go up against. And we talk about skills, it depends on what you mean, because you know how many times I've watched a basketball game and I see them travel constantly and no whistle gets blown? Like, it's insane. I love the meme or the clip. I guess to me it's a meme because it makes me laugh, of LeBron just holding the ball and taking like 8 steps without walking up the court and no whistle gets called. So, I mean, being able to play basketball without traveling is very much a skill in my book. Defense is a skill that is certainly neglected on a lot of corners in the NBA today. I mean, I would love to see some center pull the chair on somebody on defense like Rick Mahorn used to back in the day. There's just so much, I don't know. To me, I don't get why it seems like modern players go out of their way to take pot shots at the old guard. And people can say the same thing about the Shaqs and Charles Barkley's of the world, that they feel like take pot shots at today's players. But I think there are valid criticisms that can be had. But just carelessly say that all the people that built the league to the point where you can enjoy making a full-time career out of it, and it's the worldwide phenomenon that it is, were unskilled, is just ridiculous. If they were unskilled, then clearly the league wouldn't have grown to the extent that it is, because people wouldn't have enjoyed watching unskilled basketball. And if you're going to make the argument that, well, they were skilled by comparison to who they were up against, but if you put them in today's game, then they wouldn't hold a candle to the skills that players have developed. I mean, I guess, sure, but that's just how progress works. So I don't get why players do that, and I don't know, it's annoying. I mean, Bob Cousy in his day was like Kyrie Irving to all the fans watching, and obviously if you look up tapes of Bob Cousy dribbling, he can't hold a candle to Kyrie Irving, but it all builds on each other. So I don't know. Anthony Edwards needs to go watch some old 30 for 30s and some old footage. Especially like Hakeem Olajuwon, his footwork. There's a reason players pay like $50,000 to go get trained by him on a week-long footwork skills camp in the offseason. You know what I mean? So I don't know. It's crazy to me, but it is what it is. I like Anthony Edwards still. I think he's got next. He's going to be the best player in the league at some point, barring injuries. Will be an MVP. And I hope by the time we get to that point, he has a greater understanding of NBA history. And with that being said, I will call this a wrap on this week's episode of the Water Cooler. So let me know what you guys think about the AP poll. What do y'all think about Michael Penix being benched in the preseason? And I will talk to y'all next week.